Hello and welcome to the Cameo Show. We are joined today by a very special guest whom I've just met recently over the last year and feel very fortunate to have in my life. Her name is Spring Bengtzen, and she is a very busy lady, so we are very grateful to have her here with us today. Hi, Spring.
Hi, Cameo. Thanks for having me.
Of course. We also are joined by Gregory. Hi, Greg.
Good morning, ladies. I have a great joke to share.
Greg likes to start us with a dad joke, so let's hear it.
So, do you know why skeletons are always so calm?
No idea.
Right.
Because nothing gets under their skin.
Good one, and timely as we approach the almost spooky season here going into October. So thank you for that. So Spring is with us today because we met as 29029 participants together last year in 2022. And I have learned so much about her in this short period of time that I've known her. And she is so many things to so many people. Spring is a wife. She's a mom. She's a real estate professional. She is a leader and a coach and a speaker and an endurance athlete and just a beam of light for so many people. So Spring, I don't know how you do it all, but I am sure as hell impressed every time I see everything that you're doing and inspired by all of the places and people and things that you're doing on a regular basis. So thank you for being that to not just me, but to everyone who comes into your path, whether you realize it or not. So
yeah, thank you so much. I'm having fun. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So when we first met, I reached out because I was like kind of panicking. I'm going out to Utah to do this endurance event, something I've never done before, extremely challenging. I don't know anyone who's going to be there. So I started kind of looking through the participants, specifically the women, to see like, who can I kind of connect with before I get out there and see if I have some commonalities with to maybe feel a little bit more comfortable when I arrive, because the whole thing is uncomfortable when you first do it for the first time. So I saw you on Instagram and I was like, wow, she is like so impressive. I definitely want to meet and get to know her. She looks like somebody who's just extremely authentic and a go-getter. And so we connected through Instagram and chatted a little bit there, and then met in Utah, which is where you're from, where you're living, right? Yeah. And you're kind of home mountain. And I will never forget, we started on the start line that morning, all the event activities the day before. And then we start on the start line that morning early. It's dark. We're excited. We're ready to go. And I'm hiking with Spring for like literally the first 20 feet. And then she's like, bam, up the mountain. You are just like so fast. I'm like, wow, well, I am definitely not going to be able to keep up with her this whole time. I don't know how you do it. And we better start there, because you have now done 29029 how many times?
I've done it 4 times so far in the last year, and I'm doing the 2 additional ones this year. Cameo, I'm a weirdo, so I really loved how intentional the training I felt when the one that we did together. And I just loved that I just had a goal that I knew that it had that weekend, and so I trained for it. But then after that weekend, I just went back to my normal workout schedule routine. And I loved how purposeful I felt. So when registration came out this time, I was like, oh, 1 a month. Cool. That will keep my training up. This will be fun. I didn't think a lot about it. And so I signed up for all of them. It's been great. I'm grateful I did it. I won't do it again next year. It's been a massive time commitment. And quite frankly, my knee hates me after this. Like each time I'm like, this is brutal on your body. So, I'm grateful I'm doing it. It's fun. The community is amazing. I tell anybody to do it, but I'm not going to do all 5 next year. So.
Well, and I will say, and this is coming from someone who has done hard physical things. I've run a marathon. I have earned my professional bodybuilder status. Like I've trained and trained hard for many things in my life physically. And this was hands down the hardest thing I've ever done, both the training and then the actual event, which I've shared that I wasn't able to complete all 29,000 feet. And I definitely wasn't able to keep up with you that day, but you've gone on this year and like not just went from the goal of completion, but you've increased your goal to like finish while it's still dark before you even get into the next day. And you just did that, right? Isn't that what happened the most recent?
Yeah. So fun fact about myself is I actually, prior to doing 29029, I'd never ran more than like 2 to 3 miles at a time. So I went into that first one scared and nervous about it, but I was like, I will not quit. Like I'm going to make this. And I do have an unfair advantage. Like I live in the elevations. That is my home mountain. I go and climb it in the morning 2 to 3 times. So I knew what I was up against. But as I've gotten in, I'm like, well, I know I'm going to finish on all of these. So I've been working with a 29029 coach. I was like, I need a new challenge. And so he said, well, what if, because Snow Basin is your home mountain, what if we set a goal that you finish at this specific time? And so actually, those laps were taking me best and worst case scenario, like anywhere on a normal was like 60 minutes to 75 minutes when I would train. So he's like, if you go all the way through, you'd be finished before midnight. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. But the reality of it is once I got into it, I was like, there's no way. Cause you slow down as you go. Right. Mm-hmm. And, so I did finish. I finished at like 2 a.m, but my last 2 laps my first lap took me like 55 minutes. And my last 2 laps took me like double that. I was just exhausted. I look at the pictures and I'm like, I look like a zombie just climbing. And quite frankly, it was really fun and I love the challenge, but it's a lot more fun when you actually like slow it down, talk to people, take a break, like have a conversation. I literally was like up, down, up, down. I didn't stop unless it was to go to the bathroom. So the next one will not be doing that. I'll just be having a good time.
Yeah. You earn the right to look like a zombie when you go all the way through. And I guess I should back up a second and kind of explain what 29029 is really quickly since we're talking about it. So 29029 is an event that is the equivalent of hiking Mount Everest, 29,029 feet. And it's at various mountains, ski resorts across the United States and now Canada. And you basically hike up what you would normally ski down and then gondola down as you would normally ride up. So you said you're a weirdo. It takes a weirdo to do these things anyway, like to even just sign up. And then I'm going to go ahead and agree with you that it takes a weirdo to say I'm going to do all of them. But I just absolutely love your ambition. And I love that you didn't just stop with, I know I can do it and just do it every time. Like you gave yourself an extra push and an extra goal. And that pretty much wraps up who I know as Spring and who probably many people know as Spring, just always pushing the envelope, pushing yourself. And I love seeing that. So you have 2 left this year. It's so much fun to watch you. And I wish I was out there with you. I couldn't do it this year. Maybe it's in my future another time. I need redemption. I feel like I need to come back out and finish what I started the first time, but I wasn't ready this year.
Let's do it together. I'm only I committed, I'm only going to do one next year. Like I'm not going to do them all. But before we dive into anything else, I want to like give you a shout out. So this is what I love about you is, the fact that you did, like, you were like, I'm going to go find who's doing this event. And you friended me on Facebook and were like, hey, on Instagram, like, I have so much respect for that because you were just proactive and you're like, I want to meet other people. And you were so friendly. And I was like, this girl. And so I tell everybody, I'm like, my friend, I met her on Instagram. Like she DM'd me. Like that's the power of community. But I just love that you put yourself out there. And like you said, like we've been friends since. Like we've stayed in contact. You came to San Diego. So I just encourage people. I hear a lot of women, especially talk about how hard it is to meet other people or like-minded or people they're leveling up with. And I think a big part of it is like, you've got to get yourself in those communities and those things that other people are pushing themselves in those environments. But then you have to take it that next step, which is what you did, is you took it to the next step and said, hey, I'm going to go meet some new people and create some friendships. So I just want to give you like a prop / shout out because that was impressive.
Well, I appreciate that very much. I think that that's the other half of those types of events. It's an opportunity to meet like-minded weirdos, right? It is hard to find people that you can connect with in this phase of life, and using social media and these types of events as a tool to put yourself in a position to meet other people is part of why I signed up in the first place. And I'm very fortunate because in addition to you, and I know you as well from your events, I have a handful of people that I've stayed in close communication with, and it's been really fun to see people and feel encouraged and inspired by what they're doing all over the country.
Yeah.
And I would encourage anyone to really step outside of your comfort zone and try something new. And don't be afraid. We talk a lot about shooting your shot and going for it. Like, don't be afraid to reach out to people. I'm so glad I wasn't too afraid to say, hey, I'm going to be there. Let's link up, because a year later, here we are. And we, like you said, have had various encounters, and it's been really amazing to be around someone next level like you. And I appreciate our friendship and all that comes with it. So thank you for saying all of that. And the feeling is very mutual, that I feel very fortunate. So let's back up, because there's something I know about you that I first found out when I was kind of Instagram scouring, that early on in your adult life, you were in an accident, a boating accident.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it was a boating accident or if just a boating malfunction, but I'll let you explain that. But it was definitely life-changing. And it's not that I loved reading the story about what had happened to you. It's just that I loved reading the story about how you used it as a moment to say, I'm choosing to move forward in my life with this situation and this adversity and this thing that I had to overcome, and use it as fuel and use it as motivation for how I want to live moving forward. So can you take us back to that day and tell us that story about what happened?
Yeah. So I was 20 years old, and I was dating a gentleman who, we lived in Utah at the time, and he had a boat, like a cabin cruiser, the type that underneath you could sleep and whatnot. And he kept it in Utah, but during the winter, he took it to Lake Mead, which is in Las Vegas. And he hadn't brought it home for the summer yet. So it was 4th of July weekend, and he said, hey, why don't we go grab the boat and we'll bring it back for this summer. So we loaded up. We went with a group of friends. There were 5 of us that drove down all night. We got there at like 2 a.m. We launched the boat, and it was hot. It was like 100 degrees, and the boat had been being serviced. The generator wasn't working. And so it had been at the service department at Las Vegas Bay Marina. So we launched the boat, the generator works, the air conditioner's on, like we're swimming, we're having fun. And then the generator just went out, and it was late. So he was like, you know what, we'll go get gas in the morning. We'll take it over and see what they say. So we did that. We went and got gas, and he went over and talked to the mechanics at the Las Vegas Bay Marina. And I put gas in the boat, and it was hot. It was like 120 degrees in the day. And so I took a hose and I like wet myself down, like my hair and my face and all of that. And I took the hose and I sprayed everybody at the back of the boat. Just as a joke, kind of, but also like, hey, this feels good. And the boat was like super dirty from being outside, and the mechanics, like it was just gross. So I was just spraying down the boat and whatever. Anyway, what ended up happening is he said, hey, let's push over the boat or let's go to the gas dock and the mechanics, and they'll look at it. And so we pushed it off the gas dock, and the boat wouldn't start. The engines were just like revving, but it didn't have any power. And if any of you guys are familiar with boats, if you don't have power, you can't steer. And if you've ever been on a boat, like 4th of July weekend gas dock, I mean, it was like chaos. There were boats everywhere. And so the gentleman at the back lifted up the engine compartments, and there was fluid at the bottom, but I just assumed it was from the water that I'd been wetting off the boat. And so they're like, hey, you probably want to move, because the belts were rubbing, but nothing was happening. And so I went and I took the checkbook. That tells you how old I am. I took the checkbook and I just paid for the gas. I was going to go put it away. And I walked down the 3 stairs to go downstairs. And I'm like, I turned around and I said to Corey, who owned the boat and who I was dating at the time, I was like, it smells like gas. And he didn't hear me. I think he was just focused on trying to like not hit other boats and whatnot. So I just went down one more step. I put the checkbook away, and right then I heard them say fire. And so I turned around, and then as I turned around, the whole boat just went, and it exploded. And when I say it exploded, it didn't explode like a sound, like the whole boat split in half, like it exploded. And So I ran out of the boat and I'm like, I'm burning, I'm burning. And I ran out and I jumped in the water and I swam over the gas dock. And I just remember when I pulled myself up off the gas dock, like Corey was pushing my butt up to help me. And I just remember looking at my arms and they were just black, like the skin just hanging off of them, like a burnt hot dog or like a marshmallow, that nastiness. I sat on that gas dock waiting for life flight to come for like 20 minutes without skin and in the heat. But the thing that you're talking about of how it really like pivoted my life, there were so many blessings that like come from that experience if you choose to look at it that way. And one of them even just being like, I wet myself off with a hose. Well, like my 40-year-old self now generally would not do that because you care about your hair and like what you're looking like on the boat, right? Let's just be real about it. And at that time I was like, dang, it's hot. Well, wetting myself down, what it did was my hair was wet and my face was wet, so it didn't burn. And so that's when my face looks like it does. It got like a flash burn, like it was like a 1st degree, and around my lips and stuff burnt really bad, but in my nose, but like for the most part. And my swimming suit was wet. So like my private parts didn't burn. My body's 85% burned and it's just everywhere that was not wet. I mean, there were so many blessings that came from that experience. Me wetting the guys off with the hose meant that their swimming suit was wet. And so when they got burned, because their legs burned, and then they blew up in the air and landed in the water, but their legs burned, but it stopped at their swimming suit. So it singed a little bit up their back end of their legs. But again, it saved their like private parts and swimming suits from catching on fire and stuff. So anyway, there was a lot of blessings that came from it. But what ultimately ended up happening was I was in some pretty bad shape. And if anybody's been burned, when you get burned, you don't have a lot of defense against disease and stuff. But on top of that, I jumped into dirty lake water. So I jumped into dirty lake water without having the skin, plus everything else. Your body's just going in that hyper defense mode of healing. So like I got a blood disease, my lungs collapsed, I got pneumonia. Like it just wasn't like my body was fighting really hard. And a couple weeks in there, like really didn't think I was going to make it. Like I was on the struggle bus, and how I remember it and how it actually went down are a little different. My mom's like, I've heard you tell this story and this is not actually what happened. And I'm like, oh, okay. But how I remember it happening was my roommate passing away. I had an older roommate that she was passing away, and all the lights and the sirens and everything goes off. And this did happen. And all the doctors come rushing in. I remember it being like, am I dying? And the doctor coming up to me is like, no, it's your choice if you get a live or die. And I just remember being like, oh, it's that easy. Like, I'm going to choose to live. Like, I'm going to choose to, I haven't seen who my kids are, or if I've gotten married, or like I was in love at that time. Right. So I was like, oh, I want to see how this goes. And, so that's how I remember it going down. And I just know like from those, like within a couple of days, my mind went into like, oh, this is a choice or whatever. And I started going on the mend. So I actually went from, you're supposed to be in the burn unit statistically for every percent your body's burnt. So for every day. So like if it's 85%, then you're in the burn unit for 85 days. But I went from being like on the struggle bus, connected to everything, massively drugged, all those things, to my body wasn't taking I had an allergic reaction to the medicine they were giving me to get rid of the burn and the infection. To I got out of the burn unit after that within 30 days. So I was just like, it was just the mind component of it. Now my mom is like, no, Spring, same story, but it was actually a respiratory therapist, and it was that said it to me because my mouth and my throat was burned, because when I screamed, which was actually a blessing again that I screamed, because if it would have gone into my lungs, if I would have inhaled how hot that was. It would have fried my lungs and I would have died. But the fact that I screamed and didn't inhale, like it burnt my mouth down to my throat. But he was in because I was like, am I dying? Like, because I just couldn't, everything just wasn't working, And he was the one that was like, no, but if you're going to choose to live, make it exceptional. And yeah, that just has been a big part for me moving forward. I don't think I recognized Cameo at the time. Like I was like, oh, okay. But as I've gone through trials in my life, it's just really been one of those of like, this is really a choice. Like, you get to choose if you're happy or you're not. You get to choose your perspective on a situation. You get to choose if your marriage is great. Like, you get to choose your health. Like, everything in your life ultimately is a choice. And that's really been what plays forward in all aspects of my life. Like, this is one big giant choice, and the choice is yours, right? And I'm actually really grateful for that experience. There are some times I look down and I'm like, man, my skin is really funky. But like, I wouldn't change the experience whatsoever. So.
Sure. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. I didn't know all of the details, obviously, just the glimpse of what I could see from what you had shared on social media, the message in alignment with what you shared, of course. But I can't imagine having gone through that and being able to see it that way. But I think that you're exactly right. It's an opportunity when you go through something that's traumatic, whether it be physical like that, something that's emotionally traumatic, that you do have a choice. And I think it's incredible that you have almost a documented case of whether it's 100% mindset related or not, but from that moment forward, when someone presented it to you in that way and you chose, I choose to live. I want to see how the rest of my life goes, that you did recover more rapidly and that you did recover faster than anticipated. And again, you don't know how much of that played into it, but you definitely cannot discredit it.
Totally.
And I love how that has been something that has been a foundation for you and the decisions that you've made in your life moving forward. And that shows in what we're able to see with regard to your career, with 29029, that choice to continue to go up the mountain every single time when you're tired, when it hurts, when your knee's bothering you. And I think it's just a huge testament to who you are, but also just a very important message for everyone to hear, that when it feels like it's the end of the road, you can make a choice on how you view it, on how you attack it, on how you move forward.
I will say this. I think that timing in life is everything too. And the fact that it happened when I was 20 years old, I was not sheltered, but I was still young enough to not understand like the impact or like what it was. I was still in that like, hey, I'm young and college age and having fun. And so the thing for me was like, it's as if I could give any piece of advice to parents, because my parents did a really good job of, I was always a cute child, like attractive child. But they didn't put an emphasis on my looks. Like, they didn't put an emphasis of like, oh, my validations didn't come from how I looked or didn't look. It was like, Spring is a person and you're smart and you're kind and you're loving. And so when that happened, it never even crossed my mind of how I was going to look. It never even crossed my mind of like anything negative, other than I was like, dang, just get me out of here. Like, I'm ready to be out of this hospital. And I remember saying to my mom, like, I don't really care how I look. Like, I'm more than my skin. Like, just let's get out of here, And I just think that, like, as parents, if I could give anybody a word of advice, is I had a really high self-esteem that wasn't tied to validation of like anything material or look wise. And I just think we live in a society right now where it's like so much on social media and what other people are doing. And I mean, all of it, and I'm like, I just feel so fortunate. I had a friend, when they came to visit me in the burn unit, and I remember her just crying when she saw me. And she was like, cause I was like, I don't know if you've ever seen me burn, but you're wrapped up like a mummy and you're like oozing out and it's like not great. But I remember her, and my face was burned. So like my nose was black and my ears were black and my lips were, like my face was burned. It just wasn't burned to the extent of everything else. And I remember her looking at me and starting to cry. And she was like, if this was me, I probably would have wanted to die. Like, I think this is like, she just said that. And she's like, it's so great that it happened to you because you're so strong. And I know that like, I didn't take it as a great that happened to me because of like that, but she was right. Like my parents didn't put a lot of emphasis on anything more than just me as a human. And so I just never even thought about that way. Like, it was just like, oh, let's just go through the process and get out of here. And so if I could just give any parenting advice right now, like that's one thing I'm really working on with my teenagers, because it's like, there's more to this life than how we look, and what clothes we wear and who our friend circles and just all the things,
Yeah. Especially with teenagers. I mean, we're in that category too. And there's so much emphasis on things that are so important to them right now that you don't want to discredit it, but you also don't want to confirm that that's the most important piece. So not dismiss it, but also not affirm that, like, yes, pay attention to that. And I love that you shared that, because I think it's really important to, as a conversation in general, to like be armed with compliments and be armed with ways to inspire and encourage someone that aren't look oriented. That's such great advice. And in this case is a literal life or death lesson. Like that's a huge part and a huge testament to your parents.
Yeah, they didn't know what they were doing. I'm just saying, like, retrospect, it was like, it wasn't like we all have those, like we all grew up with them. Our friends, kids have friends that are this way. Like their whole validation is that how they're looking or how they're dressing or how like they're the best football player or basketball player or these things that like something happens and that goes away, like that self-worth goes away. And so it's really developing that self-worth that comes from more than just the exterior validation that you're getting from different things.
Yeah. Great advice. I also, when you were telling that story, I hadn't really thought about it, but when we were speaking before we started the episode about your speaking event this week and that Colin would be there, and Colin O'Brady is one of the founders of 29029, coincidentally. And I don't know if you've read his book, but he also had a very bad burn accident. And if you've spoken to him about that, but on the beach.
Yeah, I haven't spoken about that. That's funny. I actually did know that, but I never even think about it when I see him,
Yeah,
like,
sure. Right.
Yeah, I don't even think about like, oh yeah, by the way, but you're right. Yeah, he had that happen. Yeah.
Yeah. And in hearing your story and in remembering reading his story, a very similar approach to life after this traumatic event, and saying like, I'm not done yet, and going on and doing extraordinary things, world record worthy things, and all of the things that you're doing, it's fascinating.
Trauma just has a way of shaking you up and putting things in perspective that if you didn't have that happen at 20, you would maybe have just coasted through life and just like, I'm not feeling something, but like it makes you just go to like this whole nother place of awareness. And then you're like, I gotta take ownership of this, and I gotta build this. This is my journey. It just changes everything,
It does change everything. It's funny. Like, I don't think about it very often, very rarely, but back to 29029, Jackson Hole was like, I didn't know if I was going to finish. Like my knees were like, every time I took a step, it was like shooting up into my hip and like my leg was collapsing, right? For one of the laps on my second day, like the first lap of my second day. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then I just thought, I'm like, no, you've been through way worse. Like you have until 6:00 tonight to finish this. Cause I only had like 2 or 3 laps left, right? Not a ton. I'm like, even if each one of these laps takes me 3 hours, like you are going to, which they were short, like they were 1 mile up and down. So they weren't that long normally. I was like, nope, you're going to do this. You've been through way worse pain than this. Like you can finish this. So I'll use it as an anchor sometimes of like, girl, if you can be burned and be in that pain for months, like you can do this.
It's like the David Goggins cookie jar thing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I reference him a lot too in my thinking. I'm like, dude, if he can walk with broken feet or run with broken feet, I can handle a pain up my leg. I'm okay.
Yeah. Well, it takes a very strong will and a very strong mindset to be able to do a lot of the things that you see people doing. You included spring in these extraordinary events, and a lot of it comes from an experience that there wasn't there's always a choice, but when the choice is,
Yeah.
a lot more consequential than whether or not my leg hurts or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So I love that you're able to take that and use it as a catalyst for how you live your life and how you reference things. And that leads into very well these communities that you're creating, and this leadership role that you have in all of these communities is just so inspiring. I see you out there. Your hustle is not just limited to the mountain. Your hustle is you are a complete boss, and you're leading teams and real estate professionals around the country and sharing your knowledge in how to build their business with them. You're leading women in your Harmony Tribe, personal growth community. And these are all things that, I see you doing, and I believe that they stem from this previous experience, and they stem from, your drive as a person. But what do you think it is that keeps you going all the time, in addition to those things that you've shared? Because you are really taking on a lot. And how do you think you're able to stay focused on all of the right things all the time?
Well, I think for me, there's a couple of components. So one, like something I know about myself is progress equals happiness. So I thrive when I have things I'm working towards or that I'm progressing. So Cameo, actually, like, it's a negative if I don't have a lot of stuff going on, because then I'm like, I just start being like, what am I going to do with my time? Or what, like, I'm not as purposeful with what I have going on. So I'll tell you, I don't know that I ever thought it would turn into what it's turned into. I started selling real estate over 20 years ago. And quite frankly, I got my real estate license because I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom and sell a few houses here and there and make a little bit of money and contribute to my household. But I didn't have a vision of doing anything more with it than that. And then I was fortunate enough, I got a job with a land developer. And so, like, I had to show up at a certain time. I worked on a team. Like, I got paid very little. And I got my first paycheck, and I was probably 22, 23 years old. And I did hair like back in the day. And when you do hair back in the day, it was like you got paid in cash, and it's $20 here to $100 there, like, nothing major. So I got my first paycheck. And I remember I had $10,000 that hit my bank account. And I just remember the feeling of like, I had never had $10,000 to my name ever. And just how great that feeling was of like, oh my gosh, and I can create more. And so it became really addicting. Like I was a top producer. I've always been a top producer. And I think it was just that, like, wow, what can this do for me? And then it became a place of my marriage at that time was, there were parts that were really great and parts that weren't. But the part that wasn't was I was like, I am not okay for my livelihood, my lifestyle to be reliant upon him. So a lot of it came also from a place of like, I got to create what I have here if this doesn't work, and I think that and I was programmed because I was raised by a single mom of like, never rely on a man. So I had that programming, and then that it just fueled. And so it took off, and I'm not saying that's a good thought, because I actually don't think it's I actually think you should like find a spouse and become a great partner and all those things. But that was just the programming I had at that time. But I share all this with you. I think a lot of it just has happened over the course of the years. Now it's turned into like, okay, I see a vision and how it's possible, and let's go create an empire. And a big component of this, Cameo, is who you surround yourself with. So like, I've got great partners. It's not the spring show. I think I'm just the one who's out in front of everybody, that in all the different things we're doing that are behind the scenes. I've got a lot of leverage. So have a lot of leverage. Like, you've been working with Katie, and like, I have leverage all over the place, even house managers that manage to make sure our house is ready to go for whatever we have to. I mean, we just have a lot of leverage. And And then I would say it's also just kind of having a vision of like, where do I want to go? What do we want to do? And I'm really purposeful with my time because I want to have a life outside all of this. But I'll just say, if I can give anybody any piece of advice of whatever it is they want to create, is it's all about who you surround yourself with. That is like encouraging you, your spouse. Like I couldn't do this without my spouse. It's all about like you having that vision. Most of us just don't think big enough. And I learned that I went to NLP training. Are you familiar with what NLP is, Cameo?
No.
Okay. So I went to NLP training. It's neuro-linguistic programming. It's your brain. And I'll send you this podcast after that I listen to all the time. It's my go-to podcast. But I actually had a friend that I hadn't seen in like maybe a year and a half. But she's my level up friend. Like she's that friend that like I hold at a high regard, like I respect her. We all have those people. And she called me out of the blue and said, hey, do you want to go to this training with me next week? And I'm like, and my calendar's booked. So it's like next week, you know? I'm like, well, maybe, you know, she's like, hey, I had this friend who went to it and her whole life changed. And I've just seen their life go on fire. She goes, the caveat is it's a lot of money. And I said, well, what's a lot of money? And so she told me, and I'm like, yeah, that's a lot of money. I'm like, well, let me see if I can, let me see if I can rearrange things. But I held her at that regard that if she said like, I'm going to this, you should come. So I moved my, everything around. And I share this story with you because it was probably the catalyst to really changing my life. Like I had always made a certain amount of money and had a certain lifestyle for years. It didn't matter what my business looked like. It didn't matter like the economy. It didn't matter whatever. Like I made the same amount of money every single year for 15 years. And you know this being in mortgage and real estate, that's weird because there's the foreclosure market, there's whatever. Do you know there's teams, like it didn't matter. But because that was my programming, right? So I did whatever it took to get that however much money. I went to this training, and basically what it is your brain is like a supercomputer. And a lot of us are running on outdated programming. We're running on Microsoft DOS, like our programming that our parents and their grandparents, our parents were programmed by their parents, and we're programmed by ours, right? And so our programming, my programming, and then how to reprogram your brain and how to get what you actually really want. And that training, he asked one question. He said, how will you know if this was worth the money you spent? And so I said to myself, I'm like, if I can make the exact same amount of money I make in a year and in a month. And in my head, I'm like, how the hell am I going to do that? Like, let's be real about it. But I'm like, that's the goal. And sure enough, like a year later, like all these things started like happening. A year later, that was the reality. But I share this with you in terms of a lot of what we get in life, or everything we get in life, is basically what we feel like we deserve. And a lot of it is our programming. It's all about the programming that we've programmed ourselves. So if you want something more, you have to get a bigger vision for what you want and then start doing the work to make that happen. And so that's really where things started pivoting for me.
Yeah, I love that. And I agree wholeheartedly. I think for Greg and I, that moment for us happened when we moved to Florida about 9 years ago. We started reading a lot of books, and the book that kind of made us think bigger and challenged us to reprogram what we thought was possible was 10X by Grant Cardone.
Yep. Love that book.
You know, love or leave Grant Cardone, whatever your flavor is, but the book in and of itself and the premise of thinking, if I can do this as a goal, why can't I do 10 times that, is such a mind shift. I mean, I still have the list from when we first finished that book that I made of my 10X goals. And the majority of them have been crossed off, and many of them that remain are well on their way. And it's like those things felt impossible when I wrote them down. They were so ridiculous. It was like, yeah, I'll write that down, but not likely. And then you just start working toward it because you start paying attention to the opportunities. You start creating opportunities. You start putting yourself in positions where you are around people who support that opportunity. And then it's not so far-fetched anymore. So similar in that training. And what I love about what you said also is that you have so many great people around you, and it was someone who suggested it to you that you held in high regard. And instead of being like, it's too much money or it must be nice, you were like, let's go, and jumped in and took the opportunity to find a new venture that might open up opportunity for you. And I think people are afraid to do that, or maybe they're limited. And sometimes you just can't. I get that. Your life doesn't allow, but there are other ways that you can start seeking out some of those opportunities. And I think the underlying message is just go for it. Like, just start, take small steps. It doesn't begin and end with some big event. It's the mindset. It's the shift.
Yeah, I would say go for it. And then I would also just say, realize like you can have whatever you want. What I realized for me, I just wasn't thinking big enough. I wasn't dreaming big enough. I wasn't wanting big enough. Same with what you're just saying, Cameo, where you're like, we put it on and we're like, there's no way. Right. Like, that's me. Like, even just getting a vision of, what do I really want and why? Like, or is that possible? And now it's possible. And one of the teachings, and then I'll move on from this, but I thought was interesting was his podcast is called God Mode, and it's Win Big or Win Bigger. And I like that, win big or win bigger. But one of the things that William talks about is to create a 90-year vision board, a 90-year plan, because in 90 years, like, think about it this way. Think about, like, I'm an 80s child. So like in the 80s, like, we didn't have cell phones or the internet or the computers. Like, think about now, like, we literally carry these mini computers at the palm of our hands and can have pretty much anything we want, right? I mean, food's getting delivered, all this stuff. And so like, he's like, think about in 90 years, like, flying in a private jet won't be a big deal. So like, put that out there, because your brain, when you start putting out there of like, hey, I want, or these things, then it starts creating them now and not 90 years from now. So that's why he's like, I just want you to start thinking like huge, and then your brain will start working on how to create that. And so back to the initial question of like, hey, you're doing all these things. I don't ever think that it was an intent until now. I'm like, well, why not? Other people are doing it. Like, go model what they're doing, and find the right teams and have the right spouse, and you can have it too,
Yeah. Love that. I will get that podcast from you also and link it in the show notes, and definitely check it out ourselves. We're like total nerds on consuming as much as we can in that realm of the world. But it makes all the difference who you surround yourself with, even when it comes to what type of entertainment you're consuming, right? I mean, we're not robots. We can't consume helpful entertainment all the time, or podcasts. Every once in a while, you need a good binge on Netflix. No problem there, no judgment. But you can also control what you do with your 20-minute drive to work. And you can educate yourself through a podcast that can literally change the vision that you have for your life, and change the small steps that you take every day and the habits that you have for yourself, just by implementing them into your life and what you're already doing, and not some huge change overnight. 90 years feels crazy, but I'm going to start thinking about that almost immediately.
About it. Like, I mean, you think about like how much has happened in our lives, in our lifetime, right? Like, I remember getting a cell phone when I got out of high school. Like, I remember the pager, you're paging your boyfriend, the little, how you spell I love you, or the 911 was to call me or whatever. Like, life is just so different, So what is it that you want? And you can go create it.
Yes. And so you're doing all of these things. You've found this vision. You're creating this life by following that vision and not seeing things as impossible, but seeing them as possible. I just need to align myself with the actions that it takes to get there, and dictate how this is going to go. And that's been the story from your boating incident all the way through where we are now. I also am curious then how you balance all of the things that you're doing with that vision, and professionally as a coach and a leader and a speaker with your family life, because I see you killing it there too. I know that's extremely important to you through getting to know you over the last year. And you have a beautiful family, and just a recent addition that I see. So
cute.
How do you find the balance?
So the reason my women's group is called the Harmony Tribe is because I don't know that I believe in balance, but I believe in harmony. And generally, like when one thing's thriving, maybe something over here is not thriving as much, or vice versa, or I was speaking to somebody the other day and they're like, man, this season of my life is just difficult because I've got work and then I've got little league and I've got my wife and all these things. And it made me think, and I'm like, okay, yes, you have a few months, but it's just about creating harmony where you're having that conversation of like, hey, honey, like I have to do this, or hey, work, I've got to leave a little early for this. Like, it's just about creating that harmony. But for me, there's a couple of things. So one, I'm extremely leveraged, like I mentioned. So my family doesn't care if I do the laundry. They just want the laundry done. They don't care who made their food. They just want to have food, right? So I make sure like my home time is actually spent with them doing the things that we want to do, not having to do chores or things like that. The other component for me too is I include my children in a lot of things. So for example, I'm heading to Phoenix for a conference today. I'm taking she just turned 15. She's coming with me. I figured like she can see Jesse speaking, Sarah's going to speak, Colin, like who wouldn't want to hear them? It might
Absolutely.
It might be lame to her, like in terms of like, oh, I'm sitting in a conference, but I also was like, cool, you can see your mom on stage and get to hear some other people. So why not? My older children, I'm a blended family. So a lot of our kids are a lot older, not a lot, but they're not have some teenagers and then we have the older. And I'm making it a priority to do some stuff, involve them in some of the things I'm doing if they want. Do you know what I mean? So like,
yeah.
My intention is to go build out the female group at a very high level. And I'm bringing in my stepdaughter to help me do that. Because I'm like, it would be fun to do it with her as well, because I love her and she's talent and also those relationships. And like my son, who's 17, I'm going to bring him into my business world as well. Because again, I can have that time, which I know not everybody has that opportunity. So I'm just saying I do have that opportunity. So that's one way. I will tell you though, the two components for me is I live and die by a calendar. So my life is pretty much planned out. And if somebody would have told me that 3 or 4 years ago, I would have laughed because it was
panicked. I would have panicked. I would have been like, no way, I'm too spontaneous for you to hold me to a calendar. But I feel yeah.
Well, when you have people paying you to be part of a women's group, then they get retreats. Like those retreats have to go on the calendar. They need to plan it out, right? And I have to make sure I can show up, or different leadership things or speaking it. Like I just have to have a calendar put in place, right?
Right.
But the last thing I will say to this is my husband is awesome. And I think I've heard this. I had a client tell me years ago that I highly respected. He said, Spring, what I tell my daughters, I was in my 20s and I was going through a divorce. And he said, I tell my daughters, the person you marry is the biggest decision of your life that you'll make. And I truly believe that as well. And I truly believe like I would not be where I'm at today if I didn't have a supportive spouse that is cheering me on. My relationship allows me to be me and him to be him, and both of us to go and grow and then come together as a married partnership. And so he picks up the slack when I can't, and vice versa. Like he took Brenna to school today, or like I had a webinar I had to be on her birthday. So I had booked out the afternoon of her birthday, but not the morning, thinking she would go to school. And she wanted to get her learner's permit. So he's like, I'll take her to get her learner's permit and then you can take her from there, So just, we really work as a team. But I will tell you, like, his confidence in myself and in him as well, and in our marriage, has allowed me to go be like, hey, by the way, I'm heading to such and such to speak, or hey, I'm doing this. And he's like, cool, I'm here to cheer you on, like whatever you need. Mm-hmm. Send me a calendar invite so I know where you're going to be.
Yeah, right.
And also we plan a lot of trips together. So that was a very long answer, but I would just say leverage out what doesn't necessarily need you. Have a supportive spouse. And if they're not, have the real conversation. Like I'm sure you guys have had to have conversations, and so have we, right? Of what it's going to take for both of you to feel fulfilled and let you go do your thing and to be successful. And then I would say also who you surround yourself with. And if there's something you really want, like go find a coach, mentor, a partner. That's been like the key to all of it for me. So
I actually was thinking as you were saying all of that, I know that you're a coach, but you have coaches. Coaches have coaches. Like
So many.
having people around you to teach you what they know can turn decades of knowledge into simply days. And that is, gosh, invaluable, especially when you're living by a calendar and you're busy. You have to be intentional. You have to prioritize how things are running in your world and what's important to you. And being coached and learning from people who have done it before is not something that can go to the wayside, and it's not something you can do all on your own. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, I would say, like, first of all, if you can't afford it, go listen to the podcast, YouTube. There's enough free material out there. If you can afford it, it circumvents so much time off of your journey to go through learning from somebody who's already been through what you are hoping to accomplish. So Cameo, I don't know how many coaches I have right now. I know that I at least have off the top of my head 5 that I speak to on a weekly basis. Not like, hey, I've been part of this group or I paid for this membership. Like I have 5 right now that are on my calendar for different things in my life that I'm working on. And they're expensive. But the way that I look at it is they're not with the return that I'm getting, right? I think Alex Hormozy said it best, and I don't want to like butcher what he said, but he's like, what is it costing you if you're making $50,000 a year to not making $1 million? And I'm butchering it, but basically his point is it's the 950 grand, which honestly, for you to learn what it would take to do the $1 million is not going to cost you $950,000, right? Right. It's going to get that right coach or that education or whatever it is to go make that income. And so I just think a lot of people look at it as an expense of like, oh, I can't afford that or whatever. Well, it's only an expense if you don't take action on it.
Right.
Like if you are going to take action on what they teach you, then it's worth every penny. And so anything I want, even down to the 29029, I have a coach for that's with that community. Cause I was like, I don't have no idea what I'm supposed to be eating or fueling your body or training, and that saved me. I would have not known like, hey, I need to eat 200 calories every hour and hydrate or I'm going to blow up my body, and so pay for a coach, my friend, that's all I'll say, or go to YouTube or a podcast.
Those resources are available to everyone. And I do not think that it's just limited to business or athletics. I think that also falls into the emotional, relational category when it comes to a counselor or therapy. There are resources that are available to you where you can learn for free, or if you are able financially, it is hands down the most important money that you'll ever spend, because you're exactly right. If you put it into action, it's life-changing. That's the whole point of having someone there, unbiased, someone there to call you out, someone there to provide guidance and tell you what they've learned along the way. It's worth every penny if and when you're able to do it,
Yep, for sure.
We talk a lot about a supportive spouse. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. We have also had others on as guests who have said the exact same thing, that your spouse is the number one decision you will ever make in your life. And I just want to comment really quickly on the balance versus harmony. I think that's a beautiful way to articulate it. And I think that is also not just limited to the busyness of life. I think that you explained it well in your relationship with you and Brian. I feel this way about Greg and I. It is really all about harmony. It's not about balancing the scale and who did what, me versus you. It's about harmonizing and picking up slack when the other is busy and needs your help. And that's not just limited to activity. That's also emotionally and being understanding and supportive. And if you don't have someone in your corner like that, you said it, Spring, start having those conversations, because that is also something that is potentially limiting you, not thinking big enough, and then also not having the right people. And your spouse is a major component of that, and how you can move forward in your life and be better every single day, just one step toward better every single day.
Yeah. I would think you would probably agree with me on this, Cameo. I mean, your spouse wants to see you win. Like they want to see you win. So if you're feeling like you have a spouse that's not supporting you and whatnot, to your point, go have the conversation. A lot of times it's coming from a place of insecurity or you're not showing up correctly for them. You're like not showing up for them to feel secure enough to let you go do your thing. And I think that if you can take a gut check and have the conversations and look at what you need to do to show up differently, if you feel like your spouse isn't supporting you, you'll see a shift, I'm sure, because I know like in my previous marriage, if there was ever a time that I was feeling funky or not supportive, or I was that person, it was because I was feeling insecure about the situation, not that I didn't want to see them win. And so I would just challenge you all, like, your spouse is your number one thing always, if you're going to succeed or not. And so you want that person cheering you on. So go have the conversations of how you can show up differently to have them support you.
Yeah, that's a great lesson in taking ownership, because you're exactly right. I can tell when Greg feels a little distant when I'm very busy. Often it's not because he's feeling like he doesn't want to support what I'm doing. It's because I haven't been available to connect with him, and he feels disconnected from me. And that doesn't necessarily make him feel insecure or resentful toward me. It just means he misses me and wants to connect. And so it's hard to support someone doing more, putting more on someone's plate when you feel like you're not getting what you need from them. And so that's extreme ownership, having that conversation, but then also being able to say, okay, what does that mean for me? Not just here's what I need from you, but what do you need from me and how can I show up better? So thank you for bringing that up too.
Yeah. And I love that you pointed that out, because you're right. It's not there's an insecurity or whatever. It's that you're just not connecting because you're not taking the time to connect, right?
Yeah.
You make that a priority. So I appreciate you giving that perspective, because I think it can be both dependent upon what your relationship looks like.
Sure. We often forget that it's not me versus you in a relationship, especially as we're leveling up and we're taking on more, and different phases of life require more of us, that it's us.
Yeah.
We're facing these things together. So let's make sure we stay a unified unit. It's really easy to become a me versus you environment really quickly if you're not open and not being honest with what you need from each other, or feeling comfortable or strong enough and convicted enough to share what it is that you need. So many nuggets of great advice across the board, from like life perspective and mindset to business to like really thinking bigger and challenging yourself, to the importance of a supportive spouse. I mean, I feel like this is just a huge episode full of knowledge bombs. So thank you so much for being here, for being you. I, again, am so grateful that we met and connected. Thank you for being open to meeting someone new last year. I know that's what you were going to do as well, but part of the reason why you signed up for an event like that. And so I feel very fortunate to have connected and to still be connected in so many different ways. And for having you on our show. Thank you so much for spending the time.
I love seeing you guys doing your thing. It's fun. Like, and what I love about you guys is like watching from a distance, you're doing fun, cool things, from your podcast to business to your jiu-jitsu or whatever you're doing. Is that what you're doing? Yeah.
MMA training. Yeah.
MMA. Yeah. I'm like, you're just a great human. So I'm grateful to call you a friend.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah. We try to have fun doing everything, even in the non-fun moments. It's what life is all about. This is it. I only have so many days left, and I don't know how many there are. So let's go after it. Is how I try to think. Where can we find more about you? How can I direct everyone to learn more about what you do professionally, what you do personally? There's so much goodness.
Instagram, Reelspring B. There's a link on there. We'll connect you with all of our stuff, and you can watch what we're doing.
Yep. Awesome. I will put a link in the show notes. Thank you, Spring, and safe travels, and have fun and enjoy every moment of all that you have built and everything that you're doing. It's beautiful to watch and quite an inspiration. So thank you so much.
So welcome. Thanks for having me.